Kia ora koutou. Hopefully we are now live on Facebook with Rose Carlyle. You've sold so many books, Rose. You almost need no introduction. But welcome to the Wardini Books Facebook Live. And if anybody out there would like to ask Rose questions as we go along, please just tap them into the comments and Gareth will feed them through to us as we go. So we've got about 25 minutes to have a chat about your life and your work. And let's get down to it. So you're a lawyer and a writer and hold first class honours degrees in law and creative writing, which is quite the achievement. So how did these two things come about?
Oh, they came about at quite separate times in my life. So I started at law school in my teens, straight from school. And I was finished with it by 21. I started practicing law. And then in my late 20s, I had 3 children. And I took a break from law after my 3rd child was born because she was quite unwell and needed a lot of care. And it's really in my 30s that I started going on a lot of adventures, a lot of sailing adventures, some with my children and some without them. And then in my 40s, I started teaching law, and that was my day job. And I took up a new hobby, which I thought was just a hobby, but soon took over my life. And that was writing a novel. And it soon became all encompassing to the point where I gave up the law and I'm now a full-time writer.
Yeah, that it's quite the incredible career shift, isn't it? That you've been able to become a full-time writer. Let's just go back to the adventuring. So you're a sailor. Tell us a bit about that.
So I learned to sail as an adult, and at first I was just very happy to sail in the Hauraki Gulf because it's such a beautiful stretch of water with so many anchorages and islands and so sheltered. But I kept my downfall was reading, so I kept reading about sailing adventurers who had gone into remote and wild places, and that sparked my imagination. So then I got invited to go offshore for the first time ever, so out of sight of land, and that was to go to the Antipodes Islands, which are an island, a group of islands you're only allowed to visit with a special permit. And a friend was taking scientists there who were going to stay there for the summer and study the bird life on the island. And so I went along as crew. So it was really being chucked in the deep end with my very first offshore trip being a Southern Ocean trip. And the Southern Ocean delivered the way it always does with a huge storm.
Oh,
But funnily enough, that gave me a lot of confidence because after getting through that, I realized that I was probably never going to be in weather like that ever again. And so I was hooked. I had the bug and took the children to sail around New Zealand anti-clockwise. And after that, we took off across the Indian Ocean and sailed all the way to South Africa with the kids, which was a year-long voyage. So most of the time was actually staying on land and, well, staying on our yacht, but anchored somewhere and visiting the countries of the Indian Ocean, which are very diverse, interesting cultures, very, very different from each other. You know, sometimes you just sail a few days and you're in a completely different language and culture and cuisine is different. And yeah, I had no idea that I was storing away material for future thrillers, but it turns out that's what I was doing.
absolutely, because the water and the sailing part of it features in both novels, doesn't it? So I was going to ask which came first, the sailing experience or the stories, but yeah. So your sailing sparked the stories, would you say?
Well, sometimes it's just hard to say how everything in your life comes together. You know, like I sort of had a lifelong fascination with twins and came up with this twin plot along with my sister one day, and part of it involved one of the twins dying, and spoiler alert.
But you're not
And you know,
twins.
sorry.
You're not
My
twins, you
sister
and
and
your
I are not
sister.
twins ourselves,
No,
no.
not trying to.
No, we're actually very different, which has actually been a great strength with writing, to be working with someone who's very different from me. And so we and I thought, well, how about they're sailing and the twin falls off the yacht in the middle of the ocean, because I could completely imagine what that would feel like. And I felt I could really write the horror and the anxiety of the one left on board. And so it's interesting. I feel like the ocean just creeps into whatever I'm writing, because with No One Will Know, my second novel, the plot didn't really involve sailing or the ocean at all, but it felt like a way of explaining why my main character is very isolated at the beginning, because she's just spent 6 months sailing across the Pacific Ocean with one other person, who is her boyfriend, Xander. And so no one even knows that they're a couple. You know, she hasn't met his family and she has no family of her own. And then disaster strikes and she finds herself alone in the world and unable to prove that they actually were a couple. So it came into the story that way, and then it just kind of kept creeping into the story.
Yeah, absolutely. So I was going to ask about, your debut novel, The Girl in the Mirror, and it deals with that dangerous rivalry between siblings, the twins. And it was a pretty much instant #1 in New Zealand, I think. And
Yeah, that's right.
the international success has been incredible, hasn't it? So for a debut novel, how's that been? That whole experience?
Oh, it's been a complete roller coaster. It's been amazing, because I hadn't set my sights that high. I just dreamed of walking into a bookshop and seeing my book on the shelf. To me, that was the success that I wanted, the recognition that I wanted. And in fact, I hadn't even really thought that much about that, because I remember when it did get published, I freaked out at the thought that people would read the book. Like, what did I expect? I wrote it, I sent it to a publisher. But to have translations happening and a film option and all of those other things, a big American deal, were beyond my wildest dreams. And it was quite a ride. And then to write this book again and have it, the second book, No One Will Know, and have it so well received and achieve translation sales, and I've got a great deal with my American publishers and my Australasian publishers that sort of cover the rest of the English-speaking world. It's felt really great that it wasn't just a one-off, that I've actually done it twice now, and I'm working on a third. So it feels like I've actually managed to achieve this career, which is great, because, as I say, it started out as a hobby.
Yeah, it's incredible. So so how did you get going? You sent it out to various publishers, the Girl in the Mirror, and was the reaction to it fairly instant?
Well, I did not know what I was doing, because really what you should do is get yourself an agent, right? But I didn't even know that. So I just sent it to one publisher, and they actually took several months to read it, because unbeknownst to me, it was on the slush pile that never gets read. And then eventually I did actually have someone else who was interested in it. So I just sort of emailed them and said, hey, have you read my manuscript yet? Pretty please, because someone else is interested. And at that point they read it, and then it happened really quickly after that. They made me an offer. And so then a whole lot of things happened before the book had even come out, like it had already been, the film rights had been optioned and the translations had happened and so on, before the book even hit the shelves in New Zealand and Australia. So I hadn't realized how quickly things like that could happen.
And how unusual that is as well.
Yeah.
It's not something so 8 languages, I think, so far.
Yeah, that's right.
That's updated. And how is it going? Film rights get optioned all the time, don't they? So have you had any update on how that's going?
I can't say too much about it at the moment, but it's a long process.
Yeah, absolutely. So the glamour in both books and the wealth of people involved, I think that's something that a lot of your readers we love, that escapism, don't we, of going into that sort of uber rich and glamorous lifestyle. So tell us about this in your novels. Do you really enjoy writing that?
I didn't set out to write about rich and glamorous people, but I think the reason that they are a topic that people find endlessly fascinating is because the rich do get away with a whole lot of bad behavior that the rest of us probably wouldn't even dream of attempting. So I read a lot of nonfiction, and often I find myself thinking about the way people in real life have behaved. Often the more wealth they've got, it's like the more scope they have to get up to terrible things. So I think that's the kind of bad behavior that people engage in both of my novels are things that you couldn't do unless you had a whole lot of confidence and a whole lot of money to back you. And I think that's something that we find really interesting, is watching the super rich behaving very badly.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And I suppose the accumulation of wealth takes a bit of ruthlessness, doesn't it, and bad behaviour to
Yeah,
get
that's
there.
true. Maybe
So,
that's
yeah,
why those people are so wealthy in the first place.
yeah. So you're two novels in, and a third one on the way, and you've really perfected the art of the twist. You know, a lot of the reviews will say, like, I can't really say much about this book because there's too much to give away. You know, and as soon as you say to someone, watch out for the twist, they're watching for it, aren't they? So that's always a little bit of a strange thing to review. So how do you plan a novel that so that you don't actually reveal too much along the way?
Oh, it's really difficult. I
Mm.
mean, you're trying to sort of channel all these deep creative thoughts about yourself, but at the same time, you've got to keep your finger on all of the clues you're giving the reader and what the reader knows, because as the author, you know so much. So you have to be thinking really hard. Sometimes you make mistakes and you accidentally give things away. So you have to run it past readers and find out when they figured things out. It is like putting together a Rubik's cube, it kind of, it's like if you fix one side of a Rubik's cube, the other side gets mucked up. So you've really got to make everything work at the same time. I also think twists, those unique twists are really hard to think of. So, I have lots of story ideas like, oh, what if this happened or what if that happened? But the hardest thing of all is to write a situation as though one thing's happening and then really rip the rug out from under the reader about, good sort of 2/3 of the way through the book. That is the hardest thing to plan. So I really seek for those ideas all the time. And I discard a lot of ideas because I think, oh, no, it's not enough. It's not twisty enough.
So where do those ideas come from? It's the cliche question to ask an author, I realise, but you say you're seeking those ideas. Where do you find them?
Well, I do think they drop out of the sky, but it's like you have to be looking up, right? You have to be looking up, ready to catch them when they come. So it's not like I could just say, okay, I'm going to sit down and think of a really unique twist for a novel right now. You just sort of have to be open to it all the time, and you don't know when that idea is going to drop in your lap, and you have to recognize it and go with it. And also, there are some ideas that I have, but I just kind of can't make it work. I can't see how I can get a whole book out of it. Some ideas might work for a short story, but it's sort of, there has to be more than one twist, really, more than one unpredictable plot development that will actually get the reader interested, because they have to be interested before the twist as well. They can't just be reading thinking, oh, this will get interesting once I know the twist.
Yeah.
So it's really hard work, right? I mean, it's really hard work to write.
It's really
a lot harder
work.
than it might look. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. So once the idea lands, what's the process? Do you have post-it notes everywhere? Do you have the spreadsheet? How do you go about it?
Yeah, I do actually have a spreadsheet. I don't have post-it notes because I don't have an office, so they would all get lost when my family came to eat dinner because I'm always moving around the house, but I do have a spreadsheet. Yeah, I brainstorm my ideas with my sister, so I bounce them off her, and that's quite good to sort of hear her reaction as I go along of what she thinks is going to happen and so on. And then once I feel that I've got it quite clearly planned out in my mind, only then do I start writing. Of course, it does change as I write, but I like to have a pretty clear sense of where I'm going so that I can just focus on making each scene as vivid and as interesting as possible without me thinking, where's this going? Because I already know.
Yes. And that's the thing, isn't it? And it's then keeping that from the reader. So have you had moments with your sister where you go, okay, what do you think is going to happen? And then you're like, aha, no.
Yeah, I love it. I love it when she looks completely bewildered and she's saying, I don't see how this can be the case. Is this going to turn out to be supernatural? And I'm like, no, nothing supernatural. It's just a twist that you can't see coming. So that's when I know I've really got it. Yeah.
You've absolutely beguiled her. Yeah. And like you say before, the plotting and the twisty turniness of a novel, you've got to get readers engaged before that happens. So is that character development? How do you do that?
I think, I mean, I am a big reader myself, so I know that if I'm engaged and interested in this character as a reader, then hopefully other people will be as well. Because as you're writing, you're reading what you've written. So my classic writing schedule, if I can sort of manage to make it work, is to start the day by reading the previous chapter that I wrote the day before, or the last sort of 1,000 words that I wrote the day before, and seeing if, does that grip me as a reader? And if not, then I need to work on that before I go any further. Because I'm really aiming for the reader never to feel like they're just bored or they're just marking time to get to the next part of the book. Each chapter and each scene has to feel interesting and well rendered and, interesting in its own right, not just as part of the book, so that you get rewarded all the way along. Yeah.
So did you work on The Girl in the Mirror while you were doing your degree? Was that part of the degree?
Yeah. No, sorry. Not while I was doing my degree. No, I was working while I was doing it. So I would get up early in the morning and write it before work. So when I did the creative writing degree, I was working on, it's like my practice novel, which will never see the light of day because it's just the novel where I made all the mistakes that, are not going to be interesting for readers to read. So it's shoved under the mattress and forgotten about.
So you were doing that as a hobby while you were also practicing law and then teaching law. So how has your lawyer training influenced or helped your development as a writer?
Well, I'm always joking that a writer needs to also be a lawyer, a policeman, and a doctor, right? Because especially in crime novels, you need to know how the police operate, you need to know what the laws are, and often you need to know what happens to people's bodies when they get in, maybe a knife fight or a gunfight, not wanting to give spoilers, but that's the sort of thing that we like to have in our stories to make them build up to a really interesting climax. So I'm lucky that as a lawyer, I've got all the legal knowledge that I need. My sister's a nurse, so I can run a lot of the medical knowledge past her. So yeah, it has been really useful. In fact, one of my main characters was herself a lawyer, so that she would know when she was getting herself into a legal predicament by
that is
pretending
useful.
to be someone else. She would know exactly what laws she was breaking and what the consequences would be if she was caught.
Yeah, and that's absolutely believable that she has that knowledge then. Yeah. So how much then, moving on from that, I think I've read something that Eve in No One Will Know was based on a family member to a certain extent. How much is
that's right.
Tell us about that.
So I didn't even realize when I started writing her. It's interesting how writing sometimes digs up our deepest concerns and interests. And I had always been fascinated by the fact that, so my grandmother, when she was 13, one day she came home from school and her uncle was there, who she knew was really her mother's boyfriend. And this was in 1920, when you certainly weren't meant to have a live-in lover. And he started behaving threateningly towards her, taking off his belt, and she just ran. She ran to the policeman's house across the road, knowing as she knocked on his door that if she told him what was happening, she would never go back home. And that's what happened. She got taken into state care and she never went back home. And what has always fascinated me about my grandmother, whose name was Eileen, is that despite the fact that she came from that terrible home herself and then didn't have a mother to be a role model through her teen years, she herself was a great mother. She was very strong and very loving and courageous. And I realized that's what I was writing about with Eve, because Eve is completely alone, no help, no family to help her, and she's grown up in foster care. And here she is with a child and no one to teach her how to be a mother. And yet, like my grandmother, she rises to the challenge. What seems to me such an impossible challenge, because motherhood is hard enough when you do have your mum around to help. But that's what I really wanted to capture. And I realized sort of halfway through that that was what I was writing. And even her name, Eve, is a tribute to the idea that if you don't have a mother and you are your family's Eve, you are the first mother of your family, and everything that they learn from, table manners to a love of literature and everything in between comes from that one person. She's the origin of everything. So the book is a really heartfelt tribute to my grandmother and the amazing achievement she of raising her children the way she did.
Yeah, and that was in there all the while, even though you didn't realise it to begin with.
Yeah, that's right. And I think the reader could quite easily not really realise it, because it's a thriller with a thriller plot, but what's anchoring the whole story is Eve's character, and she has an unquestioning, devoted love of her child right from the start.
Yes, yeah, and there's a lot about motherhood in there, isn't there?
Yeah, because it's such a big part of who I am. And I think, wouldn't all mothers say the same, that motherhood is a huge part of who we are? It's not just an incidental. It really redefines who we are.
Well, you get called nothing but mum for about 20 years, don't you? So
exactly.
That's exactly who you are. Yeah. So just going back to creating character, do you have a process for that? Do they arrive in your head?
Yeah, I think they do arrive. Yeah, they kind of swirl around in there. That's why I say I'm not just writing when I'm sitting at my laptop. I'm also writing when I'm, going for a run along the beach, or I'm going for a swim, or famously sometimes when my children are talking to me and I'm not answering. It's because I'm in the world of my book and my characters are forming themselves. So yeah, I can see why writers have this reputation for being kind of a little bit crazy, right? Because you're living only half in the real world and half in a fictional world that you're creating yourself, and you do get swept up in it.
Yeah. Yeah, it's very easy to confuse the two sometimes, isn't it? There's a question just popped up on my screen here. Who are Rose's writing inspirations?
Yeah, I just have to say every book I ever read, because I don't think I write in a particular style. Like I'm not setting out to be another of this or that person. I mean, I just recently saw in the Sydney Morning Herald, I was compared to Leanne Moriarty, and I was like so flattered, like she's the best. But it's not like I sat down and thought, I want to write like Leanne Moriarty.
Yeah.
But I've read all her books, so I hope that they all go in there, and they're all in the kind of stew, and then when the writing comes out, I hope that everybody who I've ever read has influenced me. But I certainly could not single out one person.
Yeah. As an influencer, because the next question that's just popped up is, does she have a favourite crime writer? You can choose more than one, to be fair.
Pick a favourite writer at all, isn't it? I mean, I go through phases. I recently started reading a Japanese crime writer called Keigo Higashina. So the best way to find him is there's a book called Malice, which I really enjoyed. And I think I've just found that Japanese writing is so different. I can't use a better word than that, because I don't know how to describe how it's different. It just feels like it's evolved from a really different tradition. And so to me, it feels very fresh and unique and interesting. So I've really been enjoying his writing.
That's fantastic. So what's been the most, we've only got a few minutes left, we've just noticed it's gone quite quickly. What's been the most rewarding thing from this experience? Because what year did The Girl in the Mirror come out?
2020.
Yeah, so 4 years and your life has changed completely. So what's been the most amazing thing?
I think I just like it when a reader gets in touch with me. So like just the other day, an American woman got in touch and told me that my book was the GOAT, right? So she's up with the lingo. I didn't have my glasses on, and the next thing that she said is, I'm 83. And I thought, oh, she can't be saying she's 83, or she wouldn't have said GOAT. But she was. And I just loved it that an 83-year-old woman in Seattle had read my book and really connected with it. And now she wants to go and read The Girl in the Mirror. And it's, that's just one person. She's not an influencer. She's not a journalist. She's just a reader. And that's what I want. It's like, it's not about the numbers. It's about knowing that one person really, really loved the book. And yeah, that's honestly the coolest thing. When I got that email, I thought, that's who I wrote the book for. I wrote it for her.
That's just lovely. Yeah. Question here from Sage. What's your advice to a writer who has had a successful debut but is now working on their second novel?
Okay, so yes, I've definitely been through that process, and it is quite difficult. It's very distracting to be published, and suddenly you've got expectations, because when you wrote your first book, nobody expected anything from you. They probably didn't think it would be published. So what I realized eventually was I just had to ignore all of that and try to get back to the space that I was in when I wrote the first book, which is where I'm just writing sort of for that ideal reader, the reader who exists in your imagination. And then later you actually hear from
now
them,
the lady in Seattle. But absolutely.
The person who's really going to get the book and be swept away by it and love the world that you've put them in. And you're just picturing it like there's only one of them in the whole world, and that's who you're writing for. And when I got back to that, then I found that all the pressure about writing the second book that has to be as good as the first or better just dropped away.
Yeah, because it's always, not helpful to call it the difficult second novel, because there is so much expectation around it then, isn't there?
Yeah, and it's good to know that other people have found it difficult as well to get that second novel out there.
Yeah, absolutely. So you are currently writing, and the No One Will Know is just out, so presumably you're working on the publicity for that. How's that all going? What's going on in your life at the moment?
Oh, yeah, it's been really busy. So I've been on a book tour, which sadly didn't include Napier. Maybe next time.
We can do this. It's okay.
Yeah, I would really I love Napier, so I would love to go to your neck of the woods sometime soon.
Cool.
But yeah, so there's been a lot of publicity, which also includes me writing articles for various publications to sort of get the word out about the book, and also going to lots of bookshops and signing books, which has been really fun. But it's also quite nice to be sort of reaching the end of that point now, because the book's been out for 7 weeks actually, and now I'm just getting back into my usual reclusive life as a writer.
Yeah, it's a lot of writers are quite solitary, aren't they, by the very nature of what you do? So it can be quite hard then to just go and be on all the time.
Yeah, it's a huge contrast between the solitary hours writing and then the brief sort of blitz of glamour and publicity and interviews, and then whiplash back to solitary writing again.
Yeah. Is there any overseas travel on the cards for you?
Yes, well, I finally got to do that, because I was meant to with The Girl in the Mirror, and then it was cancelled with 1 week to go because of COVID.
2020.
So this time I got to go to a book conference in Brisbane, which was just lovely. Like I met a whole lot of Australian writers, and there were some Kiwi writers there, like JP Pomare, who is a Kiwi, although he lives in Melbourne.
Yeah.
And, you're just instant friends with other writers, and met a whole lot of booksellers as well. So, yeah, I finally got my overseas trip.
Yeah, that's awesome. It's a tribe, isn't it? And it's nice to be part of that in real life as well as on, online.
Oh, yeah. I love my writing friends. It's so important to have writing friends, because it is such a solitary business.
Can be. Well, I'm getting the message from Gareth that we need to wrap up. So thank you so much, Rose. This has been lovely. The minutes have zipped by there. And congratulations on the second stellar novel and all your successes here and overseas. And we'll keep a close eye on what happens next. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. It's been a real pleasure.
Cheers. Bye, everybody.